also little coffee stations like up on the patio upstairs. They're open to anybody in the hotel, right? So even though you might run into the Men's Warehouse people, you can eat their cookies too.
Just looks snappy.
So, yeah. So again, welcome to this, what I think will be interesting and important workshop. I know that a lot of you probably are not quite sure what we're going to talk about, but I think that will sort of become clear as we have a few little introductory comments here this morning. It grew out of the Earth-Free Institute, Earth-Free Foundation, to think about ways of solving the human food problem through enhanced upwelling and stimulating food production. And there's been a series of workshops, and this is the fourth on this topic. And so we're going to explore that. So again, thank all of you for coming and accepting my invitation to come. And I thought that just before we get started here, particularly for David and Alyssa and Charity, to know who everybody are, maybe it's worth kind of running around the room and just saying where you're from and what your interest is, and that way it'll sort of speed up the process of getting to know each other and what the expertise is that's represented in the room. So I'm from UCSC, I'm a microbial ecologist, and I study nitrogen cycling.
I'm Steve Lumley. I'm the director of the Fisheries Ecology Division in Santa Cruz at National Marine Fisheries Service Lab. And recent decades I've been studying the ecology and conservation of fish, but my graduate training is in oceanography, and I had some experience in studying upwelling in the open ocean.
My name is John Kay. I wear multiple hats, I suppose. I'm here as an advisor to the Earth-Free Institute, but otherwise I'm a program officer of the Global Living More Foundation. But today is Earth-Free Institute.
Hi, I'm John Ruger at the University of California, Davis, with the Tahoe Environmental Research Center. I'm a limnologist by training, and these days deal a lot with the linkage between watershed disturbance and lake response.
I'm Mary Silver from UC Santa Cruz. I'm an oceanographer and interested in planktonic food webs and phytoplankton.
I'm Hans Pertle. I'm with the University of North Carolina's at Chapel Hill Institute of Marine Sciences. And I'm located in Morehead City on the coast, and I work on freshwater marine interface, particularly impacts of nutrients and other factors, including climatically driven issues, like hurricanes and floods, on coastal primary production and food web implications of that.
I'm Mark Carr. I'm in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology here at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a marine ecologist, a benthic ecologist that's interested in coastal upwelling-driven ecosystems. So I study kelp forests and other coastal ecosystems on the coastal North America.
I'm Chris Edwards. I'm a physical oceanographer here at UC Santa Cruz, and I'm interested in the impacts of ocean circulation on ocean ecosystems and marine connectivity.
I'm Julie Robiter, and I'm a postdoc with John Zare, and I'm interested in vegetative carbon cycling and biosensors and biosamples.
Francisco Chavez, biological oceanographer from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, interested in upwelling ecosystems and their changes over time.
Zbyszek Olberg, UCSC. I'm a biophysicist. I work on the mechanisms of photosynthesis in phytoplankton and the higher plants. I also make instruments to measure the photosynthetic performance.
I'm Jim Cloran. I'm a research ecologist at the U.S. Geological Survey in Menlo Park, and I'm interested in how upwelling systems influence estuaries like San Francisco Bay.
I'm Sasha Tadzi, a postdoc at UC Santa Cruz, work with Zbyszek Olberg and John Zare. My interests are I'm an oceanographer, biological oceanographer, plankton ecology, photophysiology, and I try to help with the sensor and instrumentation development.
I'm Ginger Armbrust. I'm from
University of Washington, and I'm a phytoplankton ecologist, primarily interested in diatoms, and I incorporate genomic tools into my work. I'm also on the advisory board for the Earth Tree Institute.
I'm Ray Cadella, UC Santa Cruz. I'm a biological oceanographer doing a lot of work in the land-sea interface and specializing particularly in harmful algal blooms.
Ricardo Letelier from Oregon State University, phytoplankton ecologist, long time working on time series in oligotrophic ocean, and more recently dealing with upwelling ecosystems and oxygen zones.
I'm Sherry DeLuca from Biofuels. Right now, I'm running an experiment looking at the efficiency of transfer of lipids from specific algae to filter feeding fish.
I'm Ken Berlin from UC Santa Cruz. I'm a chemical oceanographer, in particular interested in trace micronutrient control on coastal upwelling systems.
I'm Lisa Morgan-Taylor-Jones, ecstatically grateful that you are all willing to come here on a Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday when you could be doing a lot of the work that you are otherwise having piled up on you. I'm the co-founder of Live Fuels with my husband Dave Jones, who is at this moment manning the camera, our Cornell undergraduate, Stanford MBA wizard, former Apple-ite, and other biotech companies. Live Fuels was founded as a mini Manhattan project. I'll give you 15 minutes on it shortly. And the Earth Tree Institute we put together last July, was the founding date, because if we're correct, this work could be done in the ocean and might feed humanity.
I'm Dick Dugdale from San Francisco State University, the Romberg Laboratory. And I'm a biological oceanographer, worked with nutrients and phytoplankton, and I've been probably involved with upwelling studies most of my career.
I'm David Kingsbury. I'm here right at the moment. I'm not sure why I'm here. There's a lot of other things I could have done Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. But I'm here in the role of being the president of the board of Earth-3. I've been helping these folks as an advisor for some little time. I'm currently now retired just recently from the Gordon and Betty Moore Institute, Foundation, where I was the head of the science programs for a number of years. And, before that, I had a couple other jobs. Some of you might even remember one I had in Washington, D.C. when I was the head of all biology and acting director of NSF. Anyway, that's my background, and we're anxious to hear what's going on.
That leaves you.
I'm Dave Jones. I work with Live Fuels and Earth-Free, and if you remember the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, the cartoon, at the end there was a parade and there was a guy at the very end sweeping up. That's me.
Okay, that's great. As we can see, we have a pretty diverse and interesting. And just before we get started here, I would like to thank a couple of people, especially Rafe Cadella and Ricardo, who helped in conceptualizing what we're going to do and helping to kind of work out some of the details of the ideas. So with that, I thought we would start off with maybe David making some comments, and then I'm going to kind of explain how I got into this and what happened at the last one of these meetings.
Yeah, I don't really want to say too much except welcome. It's amazing that John was able so quickly to pull together a fantastic group. And you know, from my point of view, it's really, I really appreciate your being willing to come and do this. I'm hoping, I'm expecting that it's going to be a meeting that's going to be sufficiently interesting that it's going to be rewarding enough to pay you back for your effort. As John mentioned, this is really the fourth meeting in a series that has been designed to get folks together to talk about some of these issues, and they've been building on each other. But each one, in my, at least in my opinion, and not everybody may agree, but I think each one has gotten progressively better than the one before. And part of that is we're learning as we go and are finding better ways of focusing on some of the questions we're trying to address. And this meeting now I see as being the opportunity for pulling us together in a way in which we can start formulating some explicit notions about, are there some real questions that are addressable? How do you go about addressing questions that otherwise people are not specifically interested in? You're all working around areas that are contributing. What are the real core questions? Is artificial upwelling a way of really gaining an opportunity to make the ocean more productive in local areas and controlling them? From what we hear, there's a lot of people out in various parts of the world who believe that this may be the case. And what we'd like to do, and what the idea is to get really good people together, discuss what the pros and cons of this are, what the issues are, what are the barriers to developing this kind of productivity, and then deciding whether moving ahead is the right thing or not moving ahead, or what are the cautions. And it's our goal, and that a position paper of one form or another is going to be the result of this meeting. We have not published proceedings from the other three, but I think this time, since this looks like the right venue with the right questions, we're hoping that something that productive will come out of this. What form that publication will take isn't clear. It may end up just as a web publication, but it'll be out there for everyone. So we're talking about the opportunity of sharing information more. So it's what one hopes for in science. So the questions, you all were sent this list of questions. As you think about the discussion, you think about your presentation, those are the questions that we're focusing on. If there's something we didn't have in there that you thought about, certainly that's worth raising so that we get it on the list and know how to address it. So I'm not going to say anything more. Unless there's some questions, we'll just proceed.
Are you imagining other workshops after this one, or are you?
This to me is, the ultimate workshop. But you're never finished, right? And so we don't have anything on the books right now. John has done an amazing job as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure where we would go from here, except, I think the area that is probably, and I think he's going to mention this, in the last meeting, several of the engineering questions were addressed. And what came, and that was a productive discussion, but we were a little, there were some other fundamental questions about the biology and the ecology of what was going on that seemed to me, and I think others, that were more pressing than the engineering questions.
And that's what this is.
And that's what this is really focusing on. If people want to move ahead and do, the grand experiment or some smaller version of it, I think there's some engineering questions that have to be addressed, and that would probably take a different group of people. From what we've seen, what little information is available out there, some of the engineering issues are pretty significant. And too bad Dave Carl's not here, because as some of you know, he attempted to do one of these upwellings using wave energy as a way of pumping, and didn't exactly work out the way he had hoped. And if you're interested, I think the video is on YouTube somewhere. It was a Discovery Channel show.
I have copies.
Yeah, that's right. You were the other part of it. So, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
David, can I pile on? Just in answer to your question, Jim, my guess is there will be a series of continuing workshops, because our first goal was to ascertain, is this a bad idea? If it's a bad idea, let's kill it now. The second goal is, okay, if this is not a bad idea, is it a good enough idea that we should go forward with it? as we have moved gently around the country, the answer appears to be yes. And then the third question is going to be, okay, that's such a good idea, where are we going to do it and how are we going to do it? So that's, my guess is there will be more workshops because no one has yet put a stake through the heart. You're all welcome to. If this idea is to die, I'd rather it died here than continued on for another year or two.
Well, my question is that the idea is, you can see the idea from two perspectives. One perspective is the advancement of the science, and the second one is the ultimate goal of fitting the practical goal. And it may be very difficult to achieve the second goal, but in trying to achieve it, you may do a lot of very good science. So from my own perspective, I will never kill it. Because I will be honest, I will never kill it because it's a great opportunity to do some challenging science. But that's, for me, it would be very difficult.
You're a well-known nice guy. I will cheerfully kill this idea. But mostly, we do not want to walk in the footsteps of those before us who have gone off half-cocked and gotten themselves into trouble because they didn't ask enough people, okay, is this a good idea? Let's not do something stupid like store up methane plant rates or in some way overturn the ocean's equilibrium without having thought this through.
I think that an important question that is missing from this list, when I was reading it this morning, is that we discussed it with John, and maybe will show up when Francisco talks, is the energy transfer between traffic levels. Basically, it's not necessarily how much more we can enhance production, but how we can enhance the efficiency of the transfer to where we want to get it, rather than just getting matter sink to the bottom of the ocean and producing other things. So that is embedded into the question. But I would like to see it more explicit too. It's one of the steps that if we want to feed, we have to enhance the energy transfer from pipeline to higher traffic levels.
Lisa, when Ricardo was saying there's two parts, there's the science part, the application part. From the institute's perspective, how do you guys rate 1 versus 2? Is it a blend? Is it B, mostly 2? Practical application? What's your feel?
The reason that we established the institute is because this could be such a long-term activity that it would kill any individual company. But an institute could reasonably expect to do 20, 30, 100 years of research. The real question to us is, are we correct in thinking that humanity cannot feed itself at this point for some reasons that we will elucidate, but most of you are aware of? If we are correct about that, full tilt boogie, let's move forward on a way to figure out how to feed people, because who are you going to vote off the planet?
Okay, well, we've already proven that I've got the right group of people. So that's encouraging, and I think we're up for an interesting day here. The meeting was organized by Dave Carl. At that point in time, Dave asked me to attend the meeting. I didn't really know what it was about. It was basically what this says. It was about enhanced ocean upwelling, and it was a meeting that was organized really around several different themes, but all having in common some version of upwelling. And Dave started off with this, which I think is probably a good slide for us to have mentally in our image as we move forward today in our discussions. Ocean upwelling, new production, carbon sequestration, can we, should we enhance nature? And this is pretty much what Lisa just introduced. He had put together a schedule, again in 2 days with these presentations, some of the people being in this room. Ricardo, Ginger, Sasha, and Francisco were there, I believe. And as you can see, these people all gave talks, and I'll show you what some of those topics were, so were in a readable form. But it was an action-packed 2 days with about 5 minutes in between conversations. As you can see, we already needed 10 minutes here. And so I was kind of felt that the next such workshop really needed to be more of an open-ended, where we could have these kinds of discussions about the topics rather than a lot of topics jammed into a short period of time. But the part that was kind of important for me was that there were a lot of technology and engineering talks that talked about ocean thermal energy conversion, OTEC, and where that thinking is along the lines of actually coming to enabling some technology in the oceans. And so this to me was kind of important because you could see that these people actually have gotten pretty far along the road of figuring out how to put platforms in the ocean and put down tubes with the ultimate goal of moving the water to get energy. And these things are huge, and they were kind of throwing out some numbers, and I was kind of sitting in the back with Excel spreadsheets and realizing that they're actually moving a lot of water and that this stuff is likely to happen. This particular one really is far along as far as I can tell. So this is in Honolulu. They're going to pump deep water, convert the energy in the difference in cold and warm water into cooling fresh water, which they then pump down to the Waikiki hotels to cool the hotels and save electricity, and then dump the warmed up deep water back into the ocean upstream of Waikiki Beach somewhere. And they had a list of the permits that they've gone through, and it was a rather long list, and they're most of the way through. So to me, the importance of this, and also Lockheed Martin, are really far along in the thinking of the engineering of actually doing these things on pretty big scales. So that was an important point for me, is that some of this engineering is going to happen. We can sit around and talk about experiments, but some big experiments are likely to happen while we're not watching, or people like me aren't watching. And then enter Lissa and Charity, who talked about other things that you could do with upwelling and how you might use this for some to solve some important problems like feeding people. And so these were sort of complementary uses, I thought, and it became interesting to think about how those two things might be coupled and how you might actually be able to couple that. So again, there's a lot of engineering diagrams. The Lockheed Martin people are talking about putting platforms in and synthesizing tubes in place that so they put huge tubes down into water to get deep water. And again, the mass of water that they're talking about is a lot of water. And coupled with that, we know we have a lot of global challenges. We're going to hear about that in a couple of minutes. And there might be possibilities for coupling these two things together. So this is kind of where I started getting engaged in this process, when the sort of reality that these things were going to happen, and then thinking about how you might actually do these things for a good cause, and realizing that, as we have talked about in ocean fertilizations and other things, we're really limited in the scientific understanding of these processes, limited enough that we don't really know if this is a reality or it's possible or not. And so as these presentations went along, and it was coupled with a number of science talks, including Angel White's, who talked about the experiments with the tubes that were done at Station Aloha to look at the science of upwelling and how it affects production. It just seemed to me that this was a topic worth discussion, and that we needed more time to actually talk about these things, and that some of the questions that were raised between the technological grand experiments that are going to happen for other reasons and the application of this in a biological sense, some of these questions are fairly simple, and if you have the right smart people in the room, you can answer them pretty quickly. And so that's kind of my thinking in trying to produce a workshop that was not just a bunch of science talks and not just a bunch of technology talks, but a few talks interspersed with time where you could actually kind of explore these ideas, as we've already started to do in the introductory comments. So what I sort of see as thoughts that are guiding us for the next 12 hours or so is really, how could upwelling systems be engineered to maintain nutrient plumes, enhance algal production, and feed fish? And can natural upwelling be used or enhanced to increase fish production? And so there's a number of questions there in that sheet that we put out, that we hand out, that could be used to kind of foster discussion as we go along. I think it will probably evolve, and again, the idea is to have enough time that we can actually explore things. And I think, as Alyssa said, we're looking to think about whether there's reasons that something like this can't be done. We might be thinking of other things that nobody's really thought of that might be things that can be done, but just sort of a free think tank to think about the issues involved in this idea and whether it could be used. So there's a small number of talks. Thank you for agreeing to give talks. There's no pressure on people giving talks to fit into this particular workshop. The idea was to just have some of the scientific issues involved in trying to implement some of these things, coupled with large periods of time where we can freely associate and think about how these issues might come up in trying to actually use this sort of a system to increase algal production. And as David said, I think it's probably obvious to all of us that this is not a comprehensive group to solve this problem. There are engineering issues. There's a lot more top-end ecosystem issues in fish. So you guys are carrying a lot of weight here, but at the end, it would probably involve discussions of those aspects alone. So the idea is really just these 5 talks to sort of set the stage of talking about upwelling systems in general and how that relates to fish. Again, no pressure on the speakers to feel like you're directly addressing this particular problem, because nobody's really addressed this particular problem. That's why we're here. But I think that the background will come out in Francisco's talk to kind of begin to talk about some of these issues. Hans to talk about phytoplankton and nutrients and some of the things that can go wrong and right in that, and what are the response times, and which are really relevant to thinking about what happens when you try to feed algae in situ, and whether you can, and what the rates are, and such. And then Chris to really talk about some of the hydrodynamic issues. So if you're going to do this, you have to think about the time and space problem. So you're moving water, how long does the water stay there? Does it stay there long enough for the algae to grow? Which nutrients, from Hans's talk, kind of how that interacts. So kind of going up, starting with the big picture, talking about the nutrients, the hydrodynamics, and then have Jim talk about some of these systems. We're trying to eventually get to the place of talking about where you might do this kind of experiment, how one might do one of those experiments. And so I think Jim's talk and Ken's talk about global perspectives and trace elements, and what are the factors that really constrain and regulate how these things will happen. So that's kind of that was kind of my thinking on arranging these sets of talks, is to kind of start with that. But really with no real particular set framework, except to let the conversation evolve and go from there. So that is all I'm going to say. And unless it's a discussion that has fostered, I was going to have Alyssa kind of talk about her vision, and which really sort of has fueled this workshop.
Being no serious discussion going on, this is a list of the algae dirty dozen, which there has been so much hype in the world of algae. I need to make sure that you all understand it is this century's snake oil. At least algae for fuels is. How many of you have seen the Chevron commercial that says, algae, I hear about algae oil? Some of you have. And how many of you I have heard that algae has either been solved or about to be solved by Craig Venter and assorted other good folk? We're very fond of Craig, actually. We consulted for us 13 years ago. So we are a big fan, but he started being a little more forthright about some of the challenges that come along with algae oil. And I don't have to tell the people in this room
But algae is challenging to deal with. Move your heater over.
Move your PC.
That would help.
There you go.
It is such a pleasure to be with a group of people whom I do not need to explain algae to. Frankly, you guys know more about it than we do. We began as a mini Manhattan project, as I said. In 2006, DOE was missing in action. We were deeply disturbed. We come from an old venture capital family that has a lot of military time spent by our forebears. And to watch what was happening to this country was just this side of unbearable. We have spent $12 million over the last 5.5 years. The great David Kingsbury has been chairman of our scientific advisory board from the get-go. I don't know what he did in what lifetime to deserve that punishment, but we took it on. He is now, for his sins, also president of our board. John Kay, bless you, got up at 4:45 to drive down here to join us today. Luca is the only member of the team not present today. Ginger, you all know. Just as briefly, this is our Menlo Park facility. We have about 2,500 square feet, which is fundamentally headquarters and QA/QC, where Charity checks everybody else's results. Because it's been very interesting how non-standard people's results tend to be in the algae world. This was our first pilot site. It's a fish farm. You're looking at 150 acres of ponds. Some of these ponds, the teeny tiny ones, are about 1/3 of an acre. The big ones, the really big ones, are about 10 acres. So 150 million gallons. It averaged about 1 million gallons per acre. Average depth 3 feet. At the shallow end, you could just sort of motor in. At the deep end, it was about 5 feet. So the theory on this was, go out and get your hands dirty. You know, stop playing with your chemostats, turbidostats, and photobioreactors and find out what happens when you go out there with your precious little algae. See what happens. Boy, was that a learning experience. The salt level here, incidentally, was about 1/10 that of seawater. It's a good thing it's the important guy with his phone. And this was about an hour north of Mexico. This land you're looking at sold for $3,000 to $3,500 per acre, which is cheap compared to California land. I mean, Central Valley, $10,000 to $13,000 an acre, but that ain't cheap. So this will not surprise you in relatively fresh water that came from the Colorado River, although what we're really looking at here is downstream Las Vegas wastewater, as far as we can tell, because that's what they were putting into the Colorado River coming to us. So we were looking at Anabena, Synodesmus, Planktothrix. I was so disappointed to find out that Oscillatoria had been renamed Planktothrix. And of course, the fish farmer would have periodic fish die-offs, because he was growing he was the largest catfish farmer in the state of California, producing 1 million pounds of catfish per year. But they would periodically die off, and he assumed it was the oxygen levels. I strongly suspect there were some other things going on, toxins that are well known to this group. Charity and our chemicals team did the extraction on that algae you just saw, which was, as we all know, primarily cyanobacteria. So 2 to 5% lipids when we were lucky. And Charity can talk about this if you have any interest, but it is non-trivial to get oil out of algae, and this is one of the things you want to remember. In addition to all the other expenses, when Charity was going after it, she had to mortar and pestle it to bust it open, and then put in acid to widen the openings, methanol to get the lipids into solution and out of there, and then hexane to clean it up. So the chemical extraction process could cost up to $16 per gallon. And it's true you're doing it at a small scale, but this is still a non-trivial challenge. There is no way at large scale it would be really cheap to do. So Live Fuel said, okay, let's keep on going. And we went to our second pilot site, which was in Texas, as is our third one. These are tanks of cobia fingerlings you're looking at. That's the hatchery. This is a 5-acre pond with several cages that we put in it with some of the fish, some of the clupeids that we were, okay, is it clupeid or clupeid? I heard clupeid last night, and that's what I'm going to say unless somebody tells me otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to sound ignorant here. This is our on-site lab, and this is the vision that has come out of this, which is, okay, this is the overhead shot of the ponds in Texas. These are 5-acre ponds you're looking at. If we could begin to move into nearshore operations, I don't think it'll happen in 2012, but to begin to understand what happens when we go to a bigger pond than a 10-acre pond. Although the biggest one we're operating in Texas now, we have access to is 42 acres. And then, okay, if this is such a good idea, what happens if we go to the ocean? Now, this is just a quick rundown on all the issues of the Dirty Dozen. We will give you chapter and verse if you want to hear it. But the people have been trying to make algae oil since World War II, when the Germans were running out of petroleum, and they said, oh, diatoms, they have a lot of oil, let's make oil out of diatoms. It's easy to do. Charity has taught a college student to do it who was interning with us. If they're careful with the methanol and the hexane, they won't blow you up. You could probably even teach a high school student to do it. The problem is you cannot do it cheaply. Period. End of sentence. You have in front of you the reasons. We don't usually give this list. I mean, it's not proprietary. NREL came up with this long before we came along. And we paid the Department of Energy to work with it, Sandia and NREL, as the start of this mini Manhattan project. But nobody seems willing to put it in words because, of course, that would jeopardize funding. So we just put it out there and said, here are the 12. It's a hurdle race. If you fail at any hurdle, you're done. I don't have to explain the Redfield ratio to this group. But from this comes something very important. This was a study that was put out by Savannah River National Lab in Mississippi State. It came out in 2010, and it points out something that the Department of Energy put out called it's known as the billion-ton study. Anybody here know of this thing? Yeah, it's not your bailiwick. It says fundamentally that if you rounded up all of the shrubbery in the country, all of the tree trimmings and grasses and leftover corn stover and things like that, you could get about 1 billion tons of biomass. And DOE says, hey, we could convert that, the United States, into about 65 billion gallons of oil, which would take out about 1/3 of what we use in this country. So, it's nice. Savannah River and Mississippi State ran the calculations on what would your fertilizer needs be if you did that. That would be about 5.5x over what you're using now. Okay? Good to know. Any problems with that? Yeah. There's a big fat problem with that, and here's the problem. We're running out of phosphorus. We've got 30 years left. I defer to USGeo over there, and Stephen Jasinski, do you know him? He's your resident phosphorus expert. We have not spoken with him. But as far as we can tell, USDA has been putting heavy pressure on everyone not to talk much about this. So a year and a half ago, the IFDC, the International Fertilizer Development Corporation, which is sort of an arm of USDA down in Muscle Shoals, came out and said, we haven't got peak phosphorus. No, it's okay. We're going to be okay. What they really said was, we need a lot more funding to figure this out, because they had called Syria, Russia, Morocco and said, hey, do you guys have more phosphorus than you've been letting on? And the ministers of the interior said, yeah, we got a lot more phosphorus than we've been letting on. Very reliable folks. So that was a meta-analysis where a few phone calls were made. This is not what we regard as truly reputable science. If you want to look at what the original estimates were before USDA got involved, there are 5 countries that have any significant amount of phosphorus. US, we got 30 years. Morocco is the Saudi Arabia of phosphorus, but they only have 90 years, and at present usage rates, so you can imagine, we look at this and we say, okay, if we had 30 years of phosphorus, but we then tried to implement DOE's billion-ton plan, 30 divided by 5.5, we're getting down to about 6 years of phosphorus, and then we can't grow food. Who thought this up? So this is the rest of you want to talk about sweeping up. I mean, maybe Canada has some buried somewhere. It's a big country, but their known reserves are pretty trivial. And if we had Dave Carl here, he would tell you it cycles with cadmium in the ocean, although some of you probably already know that. These were some numbers that our resident numbers wizard put together, which is, you know, it's a bit like trying to extract gold from seawater if you want to extract phosphorus from seawater in a conventional mining sense. Whereas we looked at it and said, you know, algae, 99.9% of the phosphorus in water, they will suck it right up. And we learned from our ponds, the algae then get eaten by predators. But of course, if you have, and these are Charity's photographs, I happen to love them, as you can tell, because they're so horrifying to people who don't understand water, who don't understand the ocean, that your algae could be destroyed that quickly. But if you have fish, like we do, they keep everything in balance. It's amazing what 2.5 billion years of evolution will do. This is what we found, Chaetoceros, less than 5 microns in size. We had some fish in there, and they cleaned it up. This will not be a surprise to the people in this room. So if you remember almost nothing else of what I say, here's a $250,000 centrifuge. If you made it of Hastelloy, which is marine hardened steel, it would cost more. About 7 of those Menhaden can approximately equal that $250,000 machine. And it took a guy with 2 degrees from MIT, who was one of our Sandia scientists, to put this together and say, he said, I hate to admit it, but nothing man-made can match a fish. Not dissolved air flotation, electroflocculation, biosedimentation, nothing can match a fish for processing algae. Oh, my favorite of his was 1 fish power, which is 0.001 horsepower.
So you're looking at fish as a production of oil rather than a production of food?
It is both. What people forget when they look at algae, and you guys know, is that you're going to get nitrogen and protein whether you like it or not. So you're going to get 35 to 65% protein. Humans value protein far more highly than they do the stuff they put in their gas tank. You will pay a lot more for a steak than you will for a gallon of gas. So if we're going to get that protein and that lipid anyway, and you can get 35%, I think, up to carbohydrate in algae, correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly you get a lot of protein and some lipid and a lot of ash. The fish solve most of the problems on that dirty dozen list. So that's how we got there. So, okay, we think we can do this on land. Can this be done in the water, in the big water? And then we looked at it and said, all right, if you did this in the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which is the largest on Earth. Does anybody here know the second largest exclusive economic zone? I was flabbergasted when I found out. No guesses? Would you believe?
Yes, because you told me.
Yeah, because you know, and you were such a good memory. It's France, which proves conclusively that colonialism does pay. This was a slide that Dave put together talking about, okay, and we were just a week ago tomorrow at the National Fisheries Institute, where they're all cheerfully looking at how much they can fish out of the ocean. I could not get a sense of whether those people understood, because these are all the big fish importers, seafood distributors. I could not get a sense of whether they realized that they're teetering on the abyss. This is an issue that we and you all know, which is illegal fishing is maybe a quarter of all fishing that is done. It's disturbing to think that some of the black cod we were eating last night might have been illegally fished. But as far as we can tell us if we're wrong, there is such an incentive to fish out the commons, the tragedy of the commons. Who will stop it? Coast Guard will tell you they are claimed by small nations to go and cruise through those nations' waters, but the Coast Guard has enough time and money and manpower to do about once a year. So tell us if we're wrong, but we don't see an alternative to the oceans being fished out. So, could we, by inducing algal blooms to be eaten by fish, increase wild fisheries production? And domestic, as in fish that we can control, harvest, and pull out of there. And a specific question for this group, because it just fries my hide, the aquaculture people saying, oh, we get feed conversion ratios of 1 to 1. We feed a pound of feed to fish, we get a pound of fish. All right. Pelletized feed has got to be less than 10% wet or it goes rancid. You know the fish are 70 to 80% water weight. Is there something wrong with this pig? I am flabbergasted that the aquaculture people can get away with that sophistry. So please tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably going to go on a jihad in the not too distant future and point this out, which will not make us popular with our confreres. So the truth, 99% of all algae companies will fail, but realistic ones will focus as we are on food and feed as well as fuel. Nutrient limitations, tell us if we're wrong, please. But biofuel production with what we know about phosphorus shortages? I don't think so. Fertilizer prices are going to skyrocket. They were up 3x in the space of 12 months. They went from $400 a ton to almost $1,200 a ton in 2008 with the big biofuel rush. You know that is coming again. And finally, food production per acre will drop unless we find more phosphorus. Tell us if there's any other answer. Thank you. On that happy note. Huh? Yeah, right.
Looks like when we ask you some questions.
Please.
So you said that nothing can match a fish for oil extraction from algae. What about filter feeding invertebrates like clams and amphipods and krill?
Yeah, I was just sort of generalizing, but you're absolutely right.
I mean, are you thinking about possibilities of producing invertebrates instead of fish?
Happy to do so. It's an interesting challenge because oysters are about 4 years, and so much of their energy goes into making the shell, for example. Krill are great, but humans don't pay as much for krill. So yes, we are very flexible. When I say fish, I'm just speaking sort of critters that you would eat. Yes, here.
On the phosphorus reserves, is that just based on terrestrial reserves or what's on land?
Known terrestrial reserves.
Because there's quite a bit of phosphorus that's actually mined from sediments.
You're right.
I'm not sure if that's included in that number or not, but I know North Carolina, for example, phosphate comes from Pamlico Sound.
So far as I know, this is strictly terrestrial, and our wizard of USGeo might be able to find out that answer. You're right, there's a huge amount on the continental margins, but it's interesting. If we tore up the Everglades, which is the Bone Valley and is huge, I mean, 9 of the 12 phosphorus mines in the United States are located down there. And if we ripped up a good chunk of North Carolina, we might be able to solve our problem. We haven't been able to get an answer on that. We offered the National Academy $100,000 to start a phosphorus study because, you know, they can't, some of you remembers they can't get out of bed for less than about $400,000. Not a word back. I think, Frank, I'm not sure this is an issue they want to deal with. So you're right, but it's very interesting because the mining companies who look at this are dealing with such challenges in terms of you're going into the ocean, you've got to get the permits to be hauling out the phosphorus. But there's a company in New Zealand named Chatham Rock, which is a tiny publicly traded penny stock. It's like 25 cents a share. The New Zealanders said, we need more phosphorus and we're not relying on Morocco. As a result of which, Chatham is going to mine a seamount that is, I think it's like 260 feet down. I forgot, it's a reasonable distance down. But their attitude was, we're paying $150 a ton for phosphorus and we're paying $75 for shipping to grow so many sheep that we feed. They claim they feed 60 to 80 million people. I find that, I can't understand that arithmetic, and of course they only have about 4 million people in New Zealand, but they're very proud of their sheep and they know they need more phosphorus. So they are going to the ocean. I'm sure you're right, there will be more of that, but I don't see us in the United States ripping up the Everglades and Pamlico Sound, unless we get desperate.
So is there have you seen, or does anybody know, what's the comparison between the phosphorus reserves on land and that in the ocean?
I have no idea. It's got to be much bigger in the ocean than on land, but I have no idea. As you may know, when phosphorus washes from in rivers out to the ocean, it attaches to soil particles and sinks. And there it becomes pebble, as it's known. It becomes little tiny aggregates. But the trouble is, as Dave Carl says, in the ocean it cycles together with cadmium. And when you mine it, you get uranium, cadmium, radium. And so they pull the phosphorus out of these phosphorus mines, and then they get these huge, what are known as gyp stacks, or phosgyp, which can be 200 feet high and cover acres. In Florida, the judge down there told Cargill they couldn't expand their phosphorus mine any further, at which point Cargill said, this being a year ago, said, well, we think we'll sell off our phosphorus operation. I think Cargill can smell what's coming. Because every time a hurricane comes through, the water hits this 200-foot high stack of clay, which is slowly letting its water release. But it then washes this incredibly acidic clay, gray clay, into the water bodies. Fish kills are spectacular, and none of the locals are happy. And it's mildly radioactive. What's not to like? So that's the good news for this morning. It is on your shoulders to decide if and how we can save our fellow humans from starvation. I hope you had your coffee.